Hi, my name is Tom and I'm an alcoholic. In November 2020, I was asked to lead an Alcoholics Anonymous men's step discussion meeting. The format of the meeting is for the leader to share their experience with one step in depth per week using the 12 and 12 book as a guide. I recorded my portion of the meeting to share with sponsees and others who could not attend the meeting. Thanks for taking the time to listen, and I hope that my message of recovery resonates with you. I'm Tom, I'm an alcoholic. Quick intro for those who haven't been here the last couple of weeks or haven't heard me before. Tom, I'm an alcoholic. I identify as an alcoholic because it's the short version of what I am, which is an alcoholic and an addict and a codependent and an Al-Anon and a lot of other isms and a lot of other things which 12 Steps, Alcoholics Anonymous, understanding and a relationship with a higher power, service work, all that stuff has brought me to some degree of sanity and recovery. I am an alcoholic, by nature and nurture. It's in my family tree. My mom was an alcoholic. My grandma was an alcoholic. They both recovered. I got started early. I had older brothers, so I started at age 10, drank, smoked pot shortly thereafter, accelerated from there rather quickly. And I, thankfully or not so thankfully, I burned out quickly. And the pain of my alcoholism got me to the recovery at age 18. Been sober for 31 years, multiple home groups and 12-step programs and sponsors and sponsees, and thankfully, multiple spiritual experiences. AA is my home, and really glad to call a lot of the guys I see on the screen here friends. So what brings me to step 3 is, 1 and 2, basically. Let me read the preamble, the synopsis, and then I'll get into that. Step 3 is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Step 3 is like opening of a locked door. How shall we let God into our lives? Willingness is the key. Dependence as a means to independence. Dangers of self-sufficiency. Turning our will over to higher power. Misuse of willpower. Sustained and personal exertion necessary to conform to God's will. So, step 3. As I mentioned, step 1, I was told, that I'm powerless. Powerless over alcohol, drugs, whatever my behaviors are. And I'm driven to step 1, right, by alcohol, hitting my bottom. Step 2, I started to believe, you guys showed me where the power was, was in the rooms, in the process, in a higher power. And I started to believe that power. Problem is, that's still outside of myself. I have to do something to start to incorporate that power into my life. So I am now driven to step 3. If I want that power into my to come into my life to relieve me of my alcoholism, to restore me to sanity, I've got to do something about it. So step 3, I'm driven to take because of steps 1 and 2. So at first, I didn't understand this step. I didn't like this step. I didn't like the idea of having to turn my will and my life over. I didn't even know what that meant. I came into the rehab, into the program. I just wanted to stop being a crackhead. You were now asking me to stop drinking and stop being a pothead too, which I really identified with. That was my fallback position. That was my, kind of like the friendly version of my alcoholic self. And if I stop that, if I turn my will and my life over to you guys and this thing, what's going to become of me? Am I going to have to become a monk? Am I going to be broke, and give all my money to charity? I will have to follow spiritual principles. I certainly didn't want to do that because that got in the way of getting what I wanted in my own will. So, how do I go about turning my will and my life over to these things which I don't even understand? I'm not sure if I even want to do. Again, I am driven in that direction. So I better start doing something about it. And, I was told, you know, just take some action. You make a decision and you take some action and figure out the rest as you go along. So, first I want to talk a little bit about, God's will and what that means. And the best way I could figure that one out, and it wasn't like it came instantly for me, I struggled a bit, was, I have to figure out what my will is and then look at what that opposite is, right? I know what my will was and I know what my actions were, and it got me, bottoming out at a young age and feeling pretty hopeless and helpless. And, you know, and so the opposite of that would probably be something better. God's will, a spiritual will, other focus, whatever you want to call it. You know, I was already turning my will and my life over to alcohol and drugs and anger and dishonesty and other things like that. So I understood about turning my life over to things. There was lots of powers outside of myself, and they had a lot of say on how I was going to, live my life. I certainly lost control and over making decisions because of my alcoholism. So I had to understand a little bit better about what this like self-will was and what God's will was in order to start going in some direction. The literature is really good in this. In the big book, it talks about self-will, right? Self-will could hardly be a success. If only I could rest satisfaction and happiness if I only manage well. And the thing that really I didn't understand at the time, but I've come to believe this, is that the most spiritual, most hope-filled statement is, my troubles are of my own making. Because if my troubles are of my own making, that means I could unmake them, that I could perhaps choose something different and come to a place of peace and not of trouble. I had to get there first, but it presents hope for me, right? So, in the big book, it talks about we had to stop playing God, stop arranging the play, and stop being the director. Those things were understandable in the abstract, but how does that apply in my daily life? Like, how do I go about aligning myself with this God's will that you guys are talking about? Well, number one is, when I make this decision, is I have to stop relying on self. Start sharing some of the things that I was thinking of doing with someone other than me. I was delusional for a long time, certainly, in my drinking and drugging days. And certainly after I put down the substances, I believed a lot of the crap I was selling myself. So the first thing was I had to check in on a regular basis. This is what I'm thinking. Is this God's will? Is this my will? The first time I think I started to get that was, going into a meeting and, sharing about what I was thinking, right? And I forgot what it was at the time, but it was sort of like, I would say, well, yeah, so I got this thing coming up at work, or I got this thing, with a relationship, and this is what I'm thinking, and people just shake their heads, and that would be like they're like, oh man, this dude, and that like started to give me the indication that perhaps what I was thinking and what I was going to do and my will was not the best, and I was probably headed down some wrong roads. So, that was sort of the introduction, but what I didn't realize at the time, and what I tell people today is that, hey, listen, step 3 comes a lot sooner than newcomers think. And just the act of thinking that they've got a problem with alcoholism, just the fact that they're willing to, pick up a phone and call for help or go into treatment, just the idea that they're willing to get to a meeting, stay sober one day, trust somebody enough to tell them what they're thinking, what they're feeling, those are turning our will and our lives over moments that come well before we even, ask someone to, do the full commitment of step 3, which is continue on with the rest of the steps. But those small things of saying, I came to believe in step 2, so I'm going to try some things out now here in step 3, and that means, I'm going to go to a meeting and I'm going to talk to somebody, as nervous and anxious as that makes me feel, and I'm going to pick up that phone even though it's contrary to everything I want to do. So these, contrary steps, these actions which I started to do opposite of what I wanted to do, which was just run, those were turning my will and my life over. And those were moments which, started to build upon themselves. Unfortunately, those were, I didn't take it further until I really struggled with life, and then made the commitment to continue on with the steps. And it's in the 12 and 12. He talks about on page 39, where he says, our friend's life is still unmanageable even though he is sober. And after all, only a bare start on AA's program has been made. More sobriety brought about by the admission of alcoholism and attendance by a few meetings is very good indeed, but is bound to be a far cry from the permanent sobriety and a contented, useful life. That is just where the remaining steps of AA program come in. Nothing short of continuous action upon these as a way of life can bring much desired result. So that sounds like a promise to me: permanent sobriety and a contented, useful life. I didn't know about that promise, or I wasn't ready to do what was necessary in step 3 to take advantage of that promise. I floated around 1, 2, 3 for way too long, and it brought me to suicidal thoughts and depression. It wasn't until I sought help in that sober bottom that I really turned my will and my life over to the care of a power greater than myself, and made the decision and took the action of doing a 4th step. And we'll talk about 4th step next week, but there are degrees of making a decision and taking action in step 3. And for me, the degree to which I only align myself and only make that decision, and only take that action, equals the results I get. I am that type of alcoholic that is absolutely tied to the work I do is the results I get, or the work I don't do is the pain that I get. So that was a hard lesson in my early years of, hey, I like this sobriety thing. I like the meetings, the fellowship. This is kind of cool. But the rest of my life was a wreck, emotionally, spiritually. It wasn't working for me, and so all my troubles were of my own making, and I had a decision to make and some actions that I could take in order to undo that. So, what does that mean for me? It's, I think I mentioned this earlier in one of the other sessions about, how this time through the work, I saw how much humility really kept coming up as a theme, right? So, you couldn't tell me anything. You couldn't teach me anything. I thought I had this thing figured out. And what I didn't have figured out, I was too frightened to tell you that I didn't have it figured out. I was too embarrassed to tell you I didn't have it figured out. So, running not only on self-will, but self-will, mixed with fear is a really dangerous place for this alcoholic to live. And so once I started to, take action and get relief in those areas, that's when things started to change for me. And, how they started to change is, I started to listen and take advice and share what was going on with me and pray for something. there was the standard third step prayers. The one in the big book. There's a couple others out there. NA has a succinct one as well. Um, you know, praying those on a daily basis. Asking for help. My favorite third step prayer is God help me, and that is something I could just like roll out any day, any part of the day is just God help me. And I don't know what that God is on the other side. And talked a little bit about my spiritual beliefs in step 2, and I'll talk about them again throughout the other steps. But just this act of surrender, asking for help, humility by saying that I need help, that I don't have this thing figured out, that this life thing can dominate me. Though just that act just opens up the door a little bit to having some grace come in, some connectedness, some people showing up in my life who help me through these things, give me some hope and some vision, and help me to recover. As I mentioned before, where I decide to hold back is usually where I experience pain. I would happily, go about saying I was, in recovery and that I was living by spiritual principles, but my finances would be a mess, and I'd be living paycheck to paycheck because I would spend my feelings away. I would tell you that, that I was in recovery and happy, but seething inside, and feeling every relationship was a struggle because I wasn't letting a higher power into my relationship. I used to hear this concept, this idea of in every relationship there's 3 people. There's you, there's me, and then there's God, right? And I used to think that is such bullshit. Like, why would I want God in our relationship? If I let God in our relationship, I'm not going to get what I want because God's going to get in the way of that. And what I didn't know is that I didn't know what I really wanted. I only thought I knew what I wanted. And that was running on self-will. I thought I couldn't get what I want unless I was in full control of the whole deal. And the truth is that once I started to let go of the tight grip that I had on life and realized that my way wasn't working, and made the decision and started to take the action of inviting God into my relationships, into my finances, into my work life, things got easier, things got better. My struggles lessened. And what I realized is those spiritual principles that, you guys were trying to teach me, had true value. And that if I aimed for those instead of what I thought I wanted, life was much easier. My life was better. And in some cases, I actually got what I wanted. That was the strange thing. It's almost like when I try to use bulk force, self-will, head-on determination, it didn't go so well. When I let back, left it up to my higher power, left it up to circumstance, just put in a good effort and let it work itself out, sometimes I got what I wanted. And sometimes I got what I didn't want, but it was even better than what I expected. The promises came true for me, in varying degrees by doing step 3. Because I was not in charge anymore. And the truth was, I never was really in charge anyway. I just had this delusion that if I kept hammering away at life, I'd actually, get some results. So when I start to align my will with God's will, it becomes it becomes easier. I keep using that word, but I don't. It's less of a struggle. The idea of that if I make myself useful and I make myself of service to others, and I set aside my selfish needs, even a little bit, it leaves that room for spiritual nature to come through. I start to find out who my true self is. I used to think that I was by nature a bad guy, right? That term, left to my own devices. What step 3 has taught me is that I can get to a point where, left to my own devices, I'm making good decisions. I'm doing good work because I've moved into a place of connectedness with other people and relationship with a higher power, and willing to set aside, my fears and my ego to see what happens. And what happens is that the results are permanent sobriety and a contented, useful life, like the book says. So I think that for step 3, obviously the next step is 4. I got to take that in action. I can make a decision about turning my will and my life over, but making a decision and not doing action doesn't necessarily net me any results. I've got to continue on. I've made that mistake once in my sobriety. It was extremely painful. I try to, guide men to, jump into the steps 4 through 9 right away, just to do the work, because that's where the results are and where it was for me. So when we get to, the decision point, I got to at least come to the conclusion that if I believe you in step 2 and I'm threatened in step 1, then I can't hang out in step 3 without moving on to step 4. And, the one word which popped out today and when I was looking over the step is, we turned our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And when I think about care, it's what a parent would do. It was what a mother would do, what a good friend would do, what a caretaker would do. It's very loving. It's taking care of our needs. It's nurturing. So I shouldn't be so scared of turning my will and my life over to the care of something, because I think that it's going to do a better job than at least that I did when I first started it. So those are my thoughts on step 3. I want to thank you all for being here tonight and listening, and hopefully I delivered a good message.